Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. Today, there's a shortage of young skilled workers capable of replacing skilled baby boomers. Examples of what I'm referring to include welders, industrial computer operators, machine operators, and people capable of maintaining industrial machines. Corporate managers are concerned about finding qualified replacement workers. They're also concerned about potential workers in their 20s and early 30s who lack skills such as workplace teamwork, written and verbal communication skills, the ability to be self-directed, the ability to stay on task, the ability to show up on time, and the ability to follow instructions. Our guest today is David Stoecklin, the Executive Director of the Madison County, Illinois Employment and Training Department. Mr. Steocklin is here to talk about these issues, and he is a past president of the Illinois Workforce Partnership and of the Consortium of Vocational Educators and Employers. David Stoecklin, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you, Lee.
So since the last time that you were here, which wasn't too many months ago, what's changed, if anything?
Well, I think what's changed is we've taken a proactive approach to trying to solve the very problems you're talking about. One of the things that we're doing is trying to get the word out on the street that there's some great jobs that don't require 4 years of college and 4 years of college debt. And I think that's the thing that's going to maybe turn this thing around for us.
That's the most shocking thing that I heard, both from you and from Don Vichavongsa. He was here, and I believe you two are basically on the same team in terms of trying to get young people into the workforce. And his point was that there's like 1,500 jobs today, this very day, that they could hire, but they don't find any skilled workers. Is this actually true?
It's true, and I think it's a national plague, if you will. We have a lot of kids who are pushed into a four-year college track, and in doing that, we cut them out from some very lucrative career opportunities where they don't have to worry about offshoring. They don't have to worry about middle management cuts. A plumber is going to be a plumber and make very good money, very good money.
Yeah, Don was talking about like welders' total compensation package, right, just to start, $55 an hour, salary plus benefits.
Plus benefits. Most of the trades, if you take a look at their apprenticeship steps, somebody that completes that's going to be at least $30 an hour, and then the benefit package is almost equal to that.
So how does one become one of these welders, these industrial machine operators, or people who are monitoring the computers?
I think since we're one day away from opening day, I can equate it to baseball. There's actually the minor leagues. You'll get a job in a machine shop, as an example, refine some skills there, and move on up that ladder to someday you'll be at a Phillips 66 refinery or to U.S. Steel. And folks who have those skills will always be needed. We're not going to offshore all manufacturing, all production. We can't do it.
Mm-hmm. I had one person ask the question, okay, if they can't find enough welders, what if somebody shows up from Mexico or some other country and wants to take that job?
Well, there's actually a Department of Labor program called an H-1B where we actually import workers with specific skill sets that people can't find in this country. Mm-hmm. It's not unusual to have that happen, and particularly in IT. But I think you're going to find more and more of that as we see the baby boomers leave, and we're going to have a real shortage of qualified workers, period.
Now, here I'm going to ask a philosophical question, which is probably outside of your purview of working what you do. But how is it possible when you spend $10,000 to $14,000 per student per year in elementary and secondary education that you could wind up by the end of the 12th grade with people who are incapable of doing the things that I mentioned at the beginning of the show?
I think there's a lot of reasons for it, and again, this is my opinion and my opinion alone, but I think that you don't have the core families that sort of help shepherd kids through life. There's an interesting statistic that half of all 19-year-olds, half of them, have never had a job. When I was a kid, and I'm sure when you were a kid,
Yeah.
we had a job when we were 14.
Yeah. A paper route,
Mowing
you know,
lawns, raking leaves, washing cars. I think it takes that approach where people are asked to work and fairly compensated for it to build a work ethic. And you're going to make mistakes. My first boss helped me a great deal in refining my skills as a worker. And we're talking about the soft skills.
Right. And when you say soft skills, you're talking about things like showing up on time, listening to instructions.
Exactly, and not leaving early.
Right.
It's amazing. I talked to one of our board members. He's actually had people come into a job that had a decent career path to it, and because it was hard work, they left at noon and never came back.
Yeah.
You know, you go through the entire process of being hired, you show up,
I don't like that work. I don't want to do that work.
Well, and another thing we find is once in a while there's very unrealistic expectations.
Like what?
Well, a young person will come in and think, you know, within the first 6 months they should be the floor manager, or they should be, some might even think plant manager. They don't understand, I think, the whole concept. And school isn't approached that way. School should be a training for life and for work. And if it was processed, a good example is Rankin, even Swick. Mm-hmm. They grade not only on what you do in classwork, but they grade on how you approach it. Are you a team member? Can you communicate? And I think that's important, because I think when you do that, you're starting to reinforce and build those skills.
So what we're saying to the parents who are listening is that these are important skills that they need to instill in their children.
Absolutely.
And if they don't instill those skills, the chances of the children moving out of the house are getting smaller and smaller.
That's right. They'll be in your basement till they're in their 40s. You know, I think it's important, too, for parents to realize that there is respect and quality in any of these jobs working with your hands. An electrician is a good example. Not only do they make a good living, but a lot of times they'll go to their church on a Saturday and help with a problem with some wiring. Same way with a plumber. And those folks are really adding value to the community in a way that you can't measure, but you really should. You should give some kudos to those kind of folks who are willing to do those kind of jobs and help out a community.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. I bet you remember Clyde Hartung, who was a former mayor of Edwardsville from way back in the 70s. And the first time I ever met Clyde was he was actually working in a building, the old Rohr-Costes building, and he was converting it over to be a senior citizen center. I mean, he's actually out there working with his hands, and many of the other people who worked in government were out there helping him as well.
Well, and I think my experience with United Way also shows where a lot of craftspeople will donate time, build ramps for people so they can stay in their homes, assist maybe with a weatherization project, caulking, and a few simple things like that. That adds value to a community and something, again, that we should value and try to reinforce.
Well, let's pull back just a little bit. Okay, when you were in high school, was there a vocational education program in your school?
There was in the Highland Public Schools. I happened to go to St. Paul, but there was that opportunity. Today,
and what did they teach in this voc ed?
Well, of course, everyone got a drafting course. They also had...
Tell people what that is, for those who don't know what drafting is.
Well, drafting is the ability to read a blueprint and to follow something that's two-dimensional and make it three-dimensional.
Okay.
In other words, it's the map for how a house is built. It'll show you window placements, door placements, electrical runs, plumbing runs. And that kind of knowledge, I think, sets someone up not only to be a craftsperson, but if you wanted to be an architect, an engineer. I do have some engineers on my board, and they talk about that. If we had asked every young person to take a drafting course, we would at least light that spark, light that fire that says, maybe I want to know more about this and what I can do to make it work for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so drafting, and what else?
There's welding, woodworking, automotive. And I know that some of those still exist in some of the schools in the area, but vocational education has been cut back drastically.
Now there's the question. Why are school boards not spending the money on training people for actual jobs?
I think there's two answers to that. One is, I think, from a federal edict on down, we say everybody's got to go to a 4-year institution. I think
You mean post-high school?
post-high school, you're going to go to a college, you're going to go to a university. I think the other answer to that is we live in a bankrupt nation and in a bankrupt state, and the resources aren't there, and so decisions have to be made. Do I agree with them? No. But people are making them anyhow, and I think it's up to the community to say, look, we want you to spend money on this. We don't need a bigger swimming pool. We don't need, 16 more computers in a class. I think it's got to do with direction. Where are we going as a nation, and what do we think is important? We certainly know that sports are. But I've seen also the arts cut as well. School districts getting rid of their band.
Football's still there.
And you should have a
Basketball's still
band
there?
for that, I might point out. So, that might come back on that side. But, it's a matter of priorities in the community. And if the school board doesn't hear from you, they're going to continue down the path they are.
And again, when you were in school over in Highland, were these shop classes mandatory for some people?
I wouldn't say they were mandatory, but they were certainly encouraged for certain folks who showed propensity, who showed skills in working with their hands.
I'm just going to testify here about a man that I know. The man now is a very old man, a veteran of the Korean War, just to give you some idea. But he took shop class when he was in high school, automotive, and he said that before he even graduated, he was hired by a dealership in St. Louis to come and work. And when he was drafted into the Army, he was a mechanic, and he's been a mechanic his entire life. And now in his retirement, he fixes lawnmowers and still makes money at this.
Well, and you point out just the obvious. We're not going to ship a car to India or to a call center halfway across the world. It's got to be fixed in place. And we're not going to stop driving in this country. So someone who recognized that, embraced that skill, and made it work for him in all phases of his life is the kind of persons we're looking for to pick up these skills and to work in industry. Because when we shut down industry, when we can't find people to do it, those companies will find somebody, and it might not be in this country.
Well, just an aside, it seems almost as if in our lifetime, we have deindustrialized the United States, but that's a political matter.
Right.
Not even I'm sure that there are business people that would love to get back into the industrial business in the United States, but that's, like I said, a political
matter. Well, and I think there is a glimmer of hope there. I do see some companies reshoring their operations because they've tried something and it just hasn't worked from quality purposes. It's one of the things I'll say in the Metro East. We have a high standard for our workers, and they are high quality workers.
Well, I've heard that back in the 50s, 60s, into the 70s, kid could come right out of high school and anywhere along the river, just knock on the door of a factory, say, hey, I want to come to work, and boom, he's inside.
Right.
It was just that easy. And if he didn't like that place, a few years later, he could move down to the next shop.
Well, it's amazing, some of the management that I know in industry, how many of them work a summer in a steel mill, worked a summer in food processing. And I think having those opportunities is what helps shape their careers. Unfortunately, a lot of those jobs aren't available to somebody in high school. Labor laws have really reduced the number of things that someone can do before the age of 18 or 21.
Is that right? And that really limits their outlook. They don't get the opportunity like I did when I was, I forget what summer it was. I think maybe I was 16 or 17 and got to work in a welding factory. I mean, I wasn't welding, but I got to be the cleanup guy, going around picking up stuff, wiping stuff down, doing, and they paid me pretty well too. In those days, $2.50 an hour was a lot of money for a kid.
Well, I had the same kind of opportunity. I worked in a garage. Back in those days, you rebuilt parts rather than just replace them. And so I picked up a few skills there. But you open up the hood of a car today, I wouldn't know where to start.
Well, you can not change the oil, but at least you can pull a dipstick out.
Yeah, I can do that. That's true.
Yes. So now, getting down to brass tacks here. a parent thinks, okay, my kid could be a welder, all right? The child is still like a junior or a senior in high school. What would that path look like before he's ready to go and actually start work?
Well, I think two things have to happen. One is, I'll get back to the drafting course. They have to be able to read a blueprint.
Do they offer these things?
Well, in some schools there still is drafting, but again, it's sort of like college. Is a class going to make? And by that I mean we have enough kids that want to go in it to make it economically feasible. Bottom line is, though, they need to get first the drafting course and then a welding course. They probably will need a little bit of post-secondary education, and Lewis and Clark and SWIC offer that in Madison County.
Okay.
They can actually get their certifications there, and there are a number of those that might be possible. Depending upon where they want to work, they might visit that business. And I think most businesses would welcome a visit from a high school student and their parents to talk about what kind of opportunities are there, because those managers are looking out on that floor and seeing a lot of gray hair, some bald, and they know that that person's not going to be there forever.
Mm-hmm. Let's just say that somebody is paying out of pocket. How much is it going to cost once you get out of high school, but before taking these classes you're talking about, before you're actually ready to start working in one of those factories or shops?
Well, I'll use welding as an example. You could probably get the courses you need in 1 year at a community college, get a certificate, and have less than $5,000 tied up in that entire education.
So if the family could afford $5,000, then the child.
If they can't, there's scholarships.
That's what I was going to ask you
grants.
next. Okay, talk about that. How do you go about applying for those, and what sort of qualifications do you have to before you apply?
Well, basically, it's need. That's what's going to determine what kind of financial aid you can get.
Okay, so talk about need. What is the need? I mean, I'm surprised at how much money a family can make and still qualify for these things.
That limit has risen steadily with inflation over the years. So I'm not going to profess to be a Pell Grant expert, but I would say that anyone with a family of four, as an example, who's making less than $35,000 a year has a good shot. There are some grants that are available through the state of Illinois when they have a budget. And, you know, there's things like the MAP grants, et cetera. Another way a lot of kids enter into this is through the military. As you had spoke of this gentleman you knew. You can get some great skills for nothing and earn a living while you're doing it. There was an interesting statistic that we shared with a number of the guidance counselors. And a gentleman from the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, did this. So he put up on the board 5 years of the apprenticeship and what would be earned in each one at about 1,800 hours. He totaled that up. He added to that the cost of an associate degree, which is paid for by the union and the businesses that they employ, and compared that and then showed what 4 years of a liberal arts education would cost in a state school. The difference is $311,000. That electrical worker, that electrician, is $311,000 to the good. I don't know how long that person with the liberal arts degree is going to have to work to make that up. I don't think it'll ever happen.
That's just too shocking. I mean, you went to SIU, right?
I went to SLU.
Oh, you went to SLU. Okay, I went to SIU-E, and the cost in those days was a lot less than it is today. And I didn't have to borrow. I think I borrowed like $1,000 and worked and was able to get through and walk away without debt. But now that's all I hear is like what you've just said: kids who are coming out of school or owing 100,000, 200. Well, it depends if they're going on to, you know, like getting a master's. It's not uncommon to hear about $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, depending on the school that they went to.
Well, the school and the profession, you know, it dragged. The thing that bothers me more than anything, though, is not only the ones that we're talking about to complete, but what about those kids who don't? And they have 3 years of college debt. They don't have a degree.
Right.
You know, and how many times have you heard a parent say, I don't know that my son or my daughter knows what they want to do? Well, why not work for, you know, we push kids to immediately go into college.
Right.
And maybe they'd be better off if they worked a year, got some exposure to everything that's available.
Well, remember the days when people, you know, did a year or two in the Army. I'm talking about guys. And then they would find themselves, and boy, I'll tell you, after a year or two in the Army, you were a lot more focused. Came back, and those are the straight A students,
Right.
the ones who would go to college and boom, they just, like all those guys after World War II who came back, they were like all, very focused on what they were doing. They knew that they didn't want to do what they were doing with their hands, and they wanted to, get something better. Not that hands work is bad, it's just they chose not to do that anymore.
Well, and not to even mention the fact that they have their education paid for by the government.
Right.
Because they have the GI Bill.
Right.
And I think we lose a little bit when we don't recognize all the different paths to getting this education. Our department with the county, as an example, will look at folks who are called dislocated workers. But basically what that means is they've been laid off. They're laid off, they can qualify for retraining through us, and we can send them up to a 2-year associate degree at a community college on our dime.
After being laid off.
After being laid
see.
off.
Uh-huh.
The other thing that's good, I think, that needs to be mentioned is they're collecting unemployment. For at least the period of time they qualify, the Department of Employment Security will waive their job search so that they can concentrate on their studies and still collect their unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
We're also doing some training with folks who are trade certified. And trade certified means that you lost your job because of foreign competition. If that's the case, you can collect extended benefits. There's even wage replacement at the end. And it's a great program for folks who want to look for that next career.
Well, that's, you just talked about, jobs going overseas or into Mexico, which is not overseas. There has been talk about Carrier leaving the United States. There's talk about Ford, I guess. Mm-hmm. I imagine they're already in Mexico. What's the story with that, and what's being done to bring? St. Louis used to have an enormous number of auto jobs, and now it's less.
Well, if you look at a sticker on an automobile, it'll show you how much of the production and parts are made in this country. And this is probably not going to resonate with everyone, but I think it's important for us to at least look at public dollars being spent on items that have a majority of the work done in this country. It's tax dollars, it's paid by people who work here, we should keep it here. I think what you're going to find with the Fords of the world, and keep in mind Ford didn't ask for any bailout money, is they're looking at their bottom line. And I know that they have 2 plants in Mexico that I'm aware of, probably more. We're going to have to fight that by being more productive, by being more efficient, and I think we can do that to a large extent. Mm-hmm. We still are the most efficient country, the most productive in the world. You take a country like China, and we're afraid of them to some extent, but half of the Chinese, half of that billion plus, can't read. Mm-hmm. Sheer numbers, yes, does that make a difference? But it doesn't mean they're going to be better at a job, just means that they'll have more bodies to throw at it.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of this efficiency, robots, and I read about this all the time, the reality of robots is, it's now, and in the near future, it's going to be even more impressive what robots are capable of doing. But you need to train people to be able to, 1, build robots, 2, fix robots, and operate robots, right?
Right. And manufacturing is a good example of this. It's more like a video game than it is the guy with the monkey wrench and the hammer. If you don't have computer skills, you're going to find yourself sort of lost in today's industry because, as you say, robots and the mechanism that makes them work is computer driven.
Mm-hmm. The whole idea of, I was watching the other day that they had these robots. They're like dogs. You've seen these videos, where they seem fully capable and independent. I'm not sure how independent, actually. I don't know how much somebody was actually, working with dials. But this thing was walking up hills, and in other words, it's capable of carrying stuff from here to there. You see them kick the thing to try and get it off balance, and yet it comes back to center, and it's still capable of doing this. And of course, they're working on human-looking robots as well. I guess it's a little scary, I guess, to some American workers that that the robot's working and I'm not.
Well, and I don't know how many you could ever find that look like a worker, but what these robots do is that repetitive task that can be programmed.
That welding of the car in the exact spot.
That spot. And
that
we've all seen the commercials where the sparks fly, the frame is there, the machine comes down. I don't think that any American worker should fear that. I think what they should do is embrace it and go, I want to fix that thing when it breaks. And so there you have pneumatics, hydraulics, mechanical, and electrical skills that come from an ability to work with your hands, but also a high level of thought process. You know, I think we mislead young people when we say, well, okay, I guess you're going to get a job as a mechanic. A mechanic's job is much more complicated than I think most people realize. To work with the computer data that they have and then to translate that into a mechanical fix, I think is it's a pretty tough job anymore.
In the last 2 minutes that we have here, are kids being mentored and shown the path?
I think some are. I think some schools do a much better job of bringing the business community into their school and asking them to participate with kids. You know, remember when they had co-op? When I was a kid, that was always out there. And a number of young ladies, not too many men, would go to the bank and they would work there. Young guys would go to the auto dealership and probably wash cars and sweep up. But they had the opportunity to do that. Again, I think that's where we have an issue in this country. 50% of 19-year-olds have never had a job.
Right.
Some of that's driven by our economy because not as many folks who are getting gray of hair and long of tooth are leaving a job and making those opportunities. But it's going to happen.
Well, you pointed out that a lot of them are being frozen out through laws or other reasons. They're just not even allowed in the door.
I pumped gas, I think, from the time I was 14 on. And
I pump gas now.
I do too. It's a skill that we shouldn't lose.
I remember when we were kids, you know, oh man, why won't they let me do that? Now they make us do it all the time.
Well, there's a little oil check and tire pressure and bug cleaning off the windshield that went along with it.
Well, you can trust your car to the man who wears the star.
Right. You don't see Texaco anymore.
No.
And I'm going to again comment on that. The opportunities for young people have to be from an engaged community. Business, education, government all have to work together to try to help these kids find their path in life. And
it's really important because they are, you know, they're the replacement workers. They're the ones who are going to be taking over for you and me well, somebody in this chair at some point.
Mm-hmm. No, we have to count on the future, and we just have to build it. We build it, we'll be all right.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming. This has been a really, I thought this was a particularly good conversation. Thanks a lot for coming and being with us today.
Well, you're welcome.
You're very welcome. And I've been speaking with David Stoecklin. He works with people like your kids so that they can get a job and have a career and move out of your house. So make sure that you help him out. Thank you. See you next time.